Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Week That Really Was with John McGurk and Sarah Ryan for this week ending the 24th of January, 2025. We're going to talk about, there are only really two stories this week. We've got a new government in Ireland, we've got a new president in the United States. Sarah, there's a lot to talk about, but I'll start with asking you as ever, how are you?
I'm good. We are recording this as usual on Thursday night. So I have a day of nothing planned tomorrow with my children and my husband. And I'm just telling you, John, there better be some wind. There better be some wind.
Well, you know, I may not be around tomorrow because if there is wind here, we will have no electricity. I'll be living like a caveman, probably for the entire weekend. My wife will be expecting me to put on like, you know, a leopard skin thing, go out and hunt meat and bring it home because there won't be any other way to obtain food. So fingers crossed, if you are watching this on Saturday and you have electricity, you've either been one of the very lucky ones or the storm hasn't been as bad as Met Éireann said it would be. Although, gotta say, Storm Éowyn, I like that name. I mean, I presume the British Met Office picked that one.
Éowyn just reminds me of what American people pronounce my dad, Owen's name, when we've been on holidays as a kid. So it just reminds me of people being like, Éowyn? So, yeah.
They didn't think your father was called after the princess from Lord of the Rings, though, did they?
I doubt it.
This was
I doubt it.
I mean, I never remember about 5 or 6 years ago, I was in Canada. And my wife and I were walking through one of the national parks over there. And this was around about the time like Game of Thrones was just starting to be like big. I remember there's this American family with two little girls and passed no remarks upon them at all, except the two little girls ran away. And the father was like, hey, Arya, Sansa, come here. And I was like,
No, you didn't.
Yeah,
you did not.
I did. Hand on heart. Oh, thinking, oh my. But, you know, you read about this, you read about these things in the newspapers, you know, people calling their kids after pop stars and what have you, or TV characters, and you don't really believe it, and then you encounter it in the Canadian forest. Look, let's start do this sort of chronologically. I want to do an experiment. You are, I think we would agree, Sarah, probably more of a political nerd than the average Irish person. You know more about Irish politics than the average Irish person. You follow it more closely. So can you explain to our listeners and our viewers what exactly the row was about on Tuesday in the Dáil?
Between the opposition and the government? Okay. So the row between the opposition and the Dáil was about basically the government were trying to elect the Taoiseach. We'll start there, which is a constitutional obligation of the new government and a pretty big cornerstone of our democracy, I suppose. And every Dáil, begins by electing their Taoiseach. And the opposition were shouting and roaring and screaming and screaming at the Ceann Comhairle or whatever. It seems to me, because they are still upset about an issue that has arisen about the placement of independents. Would you agree with me so far?
That is correct.
Okay.
That's correct. Yes.
So, for people who don't know, and I'm sure most people who listen to this would know, but there is a row that has broken out about the placement of who is it? It's Healy Rae.
Mm-hmm.
Who else? Basically, the independents want to sit on the opposition benches, even though they are holding ministerial office and are, I would say, for all intents and purposes, but there's no even equivocation. They are part of the government, and they want to sit on the opposition benches, which would and therefore take speaking time from the opposition. Now, I listened to Dara Cleary on the news today, and he was saying, and I don't have any reason to think that he wasn't being truthful. I'm sure he was telling the truth, that it is possible to increase speaking time to accommodate that for the opposition. But ultimately, what this row was about was that the opposition, in my understanding of it, John, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the opposition feel like that matter hasn't been settled and were kind of blocking the election of the Taoiseach with screaming and roaring because of their absolute displeasure at the fact that issue has not been settled.
Yeah, I think that you're basically on the money. Sorry, and I didn't mean to put that as a test. My basic thesis is that I think the average person on the street, if you ask them to explain it, would say, I don't really know. And I just think the whole thing And I'm going to put this to you. I think it is so beyond ridiculous. So the row is essentially that Michael and Danny Healy-Rae want to sit in their old seats, which people who've watched it all, which is a very small section of the population, but if you're listening to us or watching us, maybe you're in that segment of the population, they used to sit basically on the opposition side, up on the sort of, left-hand shoulder of the leader of the opposition in that little slot there. And they used to stand up and ask their questions about, like, why can't we legalize driving for Kerry people, or whatever their issue was on a given day. And they still want to be able to do that, but now one of them will be a minister, and the opposition, I think, are very upset that this will look on telly like the Healy-Raes are in the opposition, and, therefore the public will be misled. And also the Healy-Raes will get more speaking time, and also, people might not get on telly as much if they don't have the same amount of speaking time. I think the opposition have a point, Sarah. I really do. Where I think it gets crazy is this business of shouting and roaring and shutting down the whole chamber and making a holy show of yourself for a whole day, and demonstrating that you have the ability to stop the government from functioning, to really oppose them, to really throw sand in the gears and stop the whole agenda of the government. And you do this in a week when, and we talked about it in last week's podcast, there are 754 people, I think, on trolleys around the country lying in hospital corridors who can't get treatment. You have schools that don't have a full complement of teachers. You have thousands and thousands and thousands of people waiting on a housing list who can't get a home. You have massive problems with how this state has been governed and administered in various elements of basic governance for the last few years, which resulted in big problems. Homelessness. Yeah. Where did the opposition give a fuck? No, they didn't. It was only when they might not be on telly as much that's it, we're going to show you exactly what we can do. I thought it was mortifyingly embarrassing for them.
Yeah, I think what the general consensus was amongst the public, and I'd be inclined to agree, was a bit of a plague on all your houses thing. Because with the Healy-Raes, I do agree with you that there's an element there of, what's the expression, you want to run with the fox and hunt with the hounds, or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. You can't be a junior minister for agriculture and sit on the opposite benches. Come on. And just because you like your old seat, tough, that, like, it just doesn't work. And it's a bit silly or whatever. And I don't think that Micheál and I was going to say Micheál and Simon Harris should have conceded on that point, because I think that it shows, like, who's in charge? Micheál. Like, these guys should have been told, you're joining government, you sit with the government, and that's that. And I think that if they can't even agree on where people are sitting and are conceding such a basic, simple, silly little point to the independents already, it doesn't bode well for how they're going to whip them in the future on issues that might become a bit more difficult, shall we say. But in saying that, I agree with you that the opposition do have a point. But I think, and we've discussed this before, like, I will sit here and I will, and so do you, have criticisms for government parties, opposition, how they do, that's largely what this podcast is about. But I have absolute respect for the systems in which that Dáil is run. And I think everybody should. And I think that they behaved, particularly Sinn Féin, like, disgracefully, like screaming, like, I'm sorry, like, I was going to use a word that you're not allowed to use anymore, but like, just like animals.
Everyone's going to wonder what that word was now that you were going to use. What did it start with?
K.
Okay.
Yeah, just screaming, like, just horrible stuff. And it really, like, yeah, as you say, yes, there's all kinds of issues or that are deserving of attention in the state at the moment. And that's at one point. But another point is that you should just be able to behave yourself in a way that you're not screaming and roaring at people. So I think anybody sitting at home looking at that would be like, ugh, what are they like?
I didn't think it boded well for the new Karen Corley, who was just like, let's suspend the House. I mean, no, I would have suspended the members in question. Were I the Karen Corley, I would have said, no, I'm not tolerating this. Not tolerating this in the Dáil chamber. You don't have the right to speak right now, and you are obstructing everybody else, therefore you should be removed. I think she has the power to remove people or suspend them from a sitting. I think there used to be a time,
for sure,
back in the day when an occasional politician would performatively get thrown out. I want to stand up and shout so much about the local hospital, wherever it is, that I get thrown out of the Dáil for doing so. You'd nearly try to get thrown out. So she has that.
Did what's his name get thrown out for saying "F you, Deputy Stagg"? Did he get thrown out?
Paul Gogarty, who's back in there. I don't.
Is he back
no,
there,
I don't
or
think
is he in the council?
No, he's back in the Dáil. He got elected as an independent in the recent general election for Dublin Midwest, I believe.
I love that so much for all of us.
But he apologised straight away. He said, "Fuck you, Deputy Stagg," and then in the same breath he said, "And I apologise now for my use of most unparliamentary language." Which the last County Court has said. The last County Court has said most unparliamentary language, and then everyone shook their heads, and it was one of the greatest political moments of all our lifetimes. It was very entertaining. Just on your respect for the process and all that, because I want to say people will be like, "Oh, this typical Gript with their pro-government narrative," because I get that now these days.
But that's not a pro-government narrative. That's a pro. That there's a system there that we elected to government, and there has to be some structure to it. That's nothing to do with the government. That's whoever is the government should be given the respect to formulate the government.
Do you remember? Do you remember back there where we had a general election at the start of December, whenever it was? And do you remember what the Fine Gael slogan was?
Moving forward or something, was it?
No, that was Fianna Fáil.
Oh,
this, by the way, shows you, listeners and viewers, how shit that slogan was. Sarah can't even remember it.
All the slogans were shit. We discussed it at the time. It was something together, was it?
No. It was about something. It was like your wedding. There's something borrowed, something, a new energy. Do you remember Simon Harris's face everywhere, beaming down at you with his prematurely grey hair, right, telling you that there'd be a new energy? So this is where my criticism of the process comes in, because what was supposed to happen on Tuesday was essentially that they'd all go in. They do what happened on Wednesday, essentially, which is where people stand up. If you're two young Fianna Fáil TDs telling everyone what a great chap Micheál Martin is, then Sinn Féin do some performative like Mary Lou is better. Everyone votes. Micheál Martin wins.
Yeah.
Then Micheál Martin goes, first of all, you have to carry him out and you have to say Yahoo and Hup Ya Boy a few times. Then he goes to the president. He gets a seal of office. He brings back his ministers. They get announced. They get carried back to their various constituencies, just little celebrations where lots of people go Yahoo and Hup Ya Boy and great one for the county. And then the Dáil goes on holidays for 2 weeks. So, that's my point. That's my criticism of the government. That their plan was to come in, elect a new bunch of ministers, and then send everyone home. Having just come to the end of what was a 6-week holiday there over Christmas, their new energy was, let's elect a few ministers, hand out more jobs than ever, and then go on holidays for 2 weeks. I mean, there's election promises and there's election promises, but that slogan clearly wasn't particularly honest.
I don't know. Yeah. Well, anyway, it got took off him, and then it got sorted out today. But I'd say they were starting to sweat, thinking, "Hold on, there seems to be a storm coming. We might be if we're blocked from doing this today, we might not be able to do it till Monday."
Oh, and that all counts towards your pension as well. Every single day.
Simon Harris might get the glory of engaging with the emergency response teams over the weekend.
I got a press release in earlier on in the week that apparently there's an informal meeting of European Union leaders to discuss defence, I think, of all things, either next week or the beginning of next week. And they, for the first time ever, this is before the changeover, but it didn't say Taoiseach Simon Harris will attend. It just said that Taoiseach will attend, and they were clearly anticipating the change. Poor Micheál probably has that one penciled in his diary now as his first meeting of fellow European heads of state, and he might be able to make it if the storm comes and messes it all up for him. Anyway, let's talk about what actually happened once the row was solved and we got a new cabinet, and I've got the list of them here in front of me. We'll start with somebody who I think you know fairly well, or at least if not personally, you certainly know him by reputation. We have a new Minister for Justice. Justice Jim O'Callaghan, we'll call him.
Yeah.
Is he going to be any good?
Yeah, I'm pretty happy about this. Jim's a really smart, good person. He is a very good legal brain, and he's a barrister, which shouldn't be the baseline, but after the previous Minister for Justice, it is. And I think that he has been ignored, or largely ignored, or certainly sidelined by Micheál for quite a long time. So I think it positions him. It's a good way to kind of come into a ministry where you've got something to prove, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he will be very good. I don't know anything about what he feels personally or thinks about the hate speech bill, but you would hope that I will rephrase that and say I think that the hate speech bill was very much or at least in a large percentage of it was driven by Helen McEntee personally. So I would hope that a different Minister for Justice will shelve that particular piece of legislation. But no, I think it's good. Like I'm fair. I recognise talent when I see it. Jim's talented. He's smart, and I think he deserves a shot at this.
Well, there's a new rule on this podcast now, in front of what you've just said, which is that every time he does something good, he will just be Justice Minister Jim O'Callaghan. Every time he does something that we're criticising, I will henceforth refer to him as Sarah Ryan endorsed Minister for Justice Jim O'Callaghan. Just to remind the listeners. Yeah. I mean, my view on this is that what I think is really interesting actually is not just Jim O'Callaghan being appointed Minister for Justice, but also James Lawless is going to be in the cabinet now. James Brown, another Fianna Fáil backbencher. I would consider him to be a person of some ability. He's in cabinet. Derek O'Leary is in cabinet, and somebody, Mary Butler, is going to be the chief whip. And I think there's an interesting pattern there, which is that my criticism, people who've listened to this podcast for a long time will know that my criticism of Micheál Martin would have been, he doesn't promote talent, he promotes loyalty, and often with the impact that there is kind of a mediocre Fianna Fáil front bench that's limited on talent. Well, this time he's suddenly promoting talent. He's just been elected Taoiseach for the second time, and this time he's suddenly promoting talent. And I wonder, and people, hardly anyone will remember I said this if it comes to pass, but he's going to be Taoiseach now for the next 2.5 to 3 years. And I wonder if this sudden promotion of people like Jim O'Callaghan and James Brown and James Lawless to cabinet isn't a signal to start the gun on the leadership election because I am standing down at the end of this term as Taoiseach.
Maybe.
Yeah,
but he certainly has, like, I mean, I'm really happy to see Dara Cleary back. I like Dara. I know Dara personally. He's another really good person. I don't know James Lawless or James Brown that well. But yeah, no, he definitely seems to have gone for, talent over mediocrity. That's why Timmy Dooley wasn't promoted. So, yeah, I think good news all around from that perspective.
Well, let's talk about some other appointments, because there are two interesting ones. Helen McEntee, I'm going to call her Helen Justice. What was wrong with you? Helen McEntee, for whom we have long associated with the Department of Justice, is now being moved to finish off whatever remains of the Irish education system.
Yeah, I think this is a worry.
It's an interesting one because I think the Department of Education is probably, of all the departments in government, it is the one that needs a stronger ministry. Because I remember talking to a former Minister for Education in one of Bertie Ahern's governments, who shall remain nameless, who said of the Department of Education, having been in several ministries, that it was the one where the civil servants tried to railroad this particular person, not saying if they're male or female, because there are a few, tried to railroad them the most. So that basically they treat you like a spokesperson. You go in there, they set the policy, and they really try to railroad you. And I think if you were a cynic, and you and I discussed this in the podcast, you looked at Norma Foley's record in education, where all of a sudden she found herself endorsing Norma Foley, very conservative, well-to-do.
Conservative?
Some might say,
conservative. You're not allowed to call her someone conservative who is putting fisting into children's books. I'm a conservative.
This is the point I'm making. There are other words I could use. Buttoned up, personally conservative, quite religious woman from Kerry, who was a teacher. I believe she taught religion and SPHE in schools. And suddenly she's in the Department of Education and she's signing off on fisting in children's books. I think that confirms what the former minister I was talking to a couple of years ago about this said, which is that the Department of Justice is running itself and just telling the minister what to say. And I think if that's the case, then Helen McEntee is entirely the wrong person to put into it.
Well, I mean, I think Helen McEntee is entirely the wrong person to put into every ministry, but that's besides the point. I think that she is a very she has an agenda, a political, we'll say she has a political philosophy that is completely at odds to everything I think. And I think that is shown through in her approach to justice. And I think that will show through in her approach to education. The problem, and it won't show through in as much as that I think a lot of the NGOs and people who work within the education system are captured already. So it's not like she's gonna be pushing an open door there. And to your point, what we could have done with somebody was going to push back on that, to challenge that, to start to push back on that kind of nonsense they want to teach in schools, etc., etc., etc. And with Helen McEntee, we're going to get the opposite of that. So that's why that's a worry, I think.
And look, we were fair here. We'll give every minister a chance, and we'll see what they actually do. But we're just giving our initial impressions. Another one the one that I think is most intriguing, the one that interests me the most, just to see how she will do, is the appointment of cabinet first timer Jennifer Carroll MacNeil.
I know.
Fine Gael and Leary to the Department of Health, famously described by Brian Cowan as Angola, the place where political careers go to die. Brave woman for taking it on, but like, I'd be very interested to see how she does there. I mean, my immediate reaction to that was that Simon saw her as a future leadership contender, and that's why she was put into health. That was my immediate thing. You're not suggesting he did it to help those leadership ambitions, I take it. That's my point. No, the opposite. Like, how somebody would cut their ministerial teeth on health. I mean, it's nothing to do with ability, because I actually think she's quite capable, but that is a big monster to wrestle with for anybody. But I think that somebody like there's not much precedent there for the person who goes into health not to have some ministerial experience behind them before they're put into that. And that's not a criticism of her, because like I say, I think she's quite capable. But the only conclusion I can come to is that there's some, if I was Simon Harris and I was concerned about leadership, challenges to my leadership in the future, that's the place I'd put the person I was worried about the most. Yeah. Well, I'll just say this, Jennifer, if you are watching, and I know you're probably not, and I know when you go to hire advisors, it won't be the likes of me, it'll be the likes of Hugh O'Connell, who's just joined from the Sunday Times, Sarah, who's going to be the Deputy Government Press Secretary. I know. That's a shock. And there'll be lots of other journalists, I'm sure, joining your team. I'll just give you one free piece of advice on this podcast. You can't fix the waiting lists. Don't bother trying. You're not going to be able to do it. All your predecessors have tried to do it. Fix the user experience. Just make the hospitals a little bit nicer. As I said on last week's podcast, make the chairs more comfortable. Make the staff more pleasant. Focus on making the environment where people are spending their time a little bit nicer. And a lot of people will notice that in a way that they won't notice that they're suddenly on a waiting list for 4.5 months as opposed to 6.5 months. And that's something you can actually deliver with a little bit of effort and energy in visiting the hospitals. So that's what I would do if I was Minister for Health or advising one tomorrow. But we'll see what she actually does, which will probably be just advocate for more money for the HSE. You're rolling your eyes. Because I think it's a bit defeatist, that we're so beaten down and any kind of hope or expectation that anything would change within the health service is just so gone from us that now we're just asking for a few, chairs with plastic chairs without ridges on the edges. I mean, really, like that's the level of our ambition. I think I think Micheál was successful in health, and I say successful, but I think that like you pick one thing and you hope to get out alive if you pick one thing. And so Micheál Martin will always just be like smoking ban, smoking ban, smoking ban. And I think if you pick one thing, you might make it. But I think the problem for her... You can't do what you just did, which is like, you're being really defeatist by telling her to just pick one thing, i.e. like, the user experience, whereas you should I think something big, not chairs, like a children's hospital. Chairs is big. But I think the reason we're defeatist on health there is because like health policy is designed to be contradictory all the time. They're like, we want to put more resources into a crammed system, what are we going to use those resources for? To give more and more free healthcare to more and more people. So we're going to extend GP visits for kids until they're 33 years of age or whatever, jam up the waiting rooms, jam up the A&E, and then bemoan the state of overcrowding in the system while you're constantly fueling demand and not increasing supply. The government is full of contradictory policies in health because every minister comes in and does the same nonsense, which is, I can't actually fix that overcrowding in hospitals, but I can tell middle-class parents who aren't in those hospitals that little Johnny, if he has a runny nose, can go to the doctor and you don't have to pay your 50 quid. That's health policy, and that's why it's such a disaster. That's my opinion.
Well, I mean, you put it so positively and, you made it sound so great. I could be, how could I disagree?
I don't know. I just think, fix. You can't do the major reform that is necessary because there's no political appetite for it. The coalition will fall apart. So just as you say, pick one thing. You say it should be something like smoking ban. I think it should be just fixing the user experience.
I think it should be the children's hospital. I think it should be the children's hospital. I think the children's hospital. If you can just decide that, like, this government will probably go the 5 years. So you just decide that your entire legacy is going to be the children's hospital, and that's it. Not a bit of this and a bit of that, just the children's hospital, and that the consequences of that, will be huge.
Now, another thing, and the last thing we'll say about the Irish government is, because obviously some listeners will always say the number one issue in the country at the moment that they need to address is immigration. And just to say, obviously, there's been no announcement in the cabinet, but I understand that there is now to be a new special junior minister, probably working with Jim O'Callaghan at the Department of Justice, whose sole remit will be fixing or dealing with in some way the whole immigration and housing policy. So, like, what poor unfortunate sap.
Sorry, I changed my mind. The person that I thought was going to be challenging me for leadership, that's the job I'd give them.
That's the job you'd give them. Like,
yeah.
What poor unfortunate misery of a sap is going to get that. I'd give that to women independence. I really would. I'm not saying...
Oh, totally.
I'm not saying,
tell
by
me
the
you
way,
absolutely hate my guts without telling me you hate my guts. Here, we're making you junior minister for immigration.
Yeah. And that person then will have the hardest job. I think objectively the hardest job in all of Irish politics, because I know there'll be people in our comments who'll say, just increase deportations. Yeah, you can do that. But to do that, first of all, you've got to increase the process by which people are deported, which means you've got to reform the legal system. You've got to deal with this mess of immigration housing that's been built up around the country under the predecessor's government. You've got more and more people coming in with commitments to house them. It's not as easy as just like, you can't do a Donald Trump and do
okay, but John, it's not easy, and it is a mess because of government policy leading up to this point.
Yes.
Like, it didn't become a mess by itself. It became a mess.
I agree.
Because while it was turning into a dumpster fire of mess, the government were gaslighting the public and pretending like that everything was fine. That's why
this minister, this poor junior minister, whoever it is, they won't be responsible. This is my point. They're not going to be responsible for setting government policy. They're going to be stuck with the same government policy that we've had up to date. This is just going to be, this is the person who gets the job of managing this system. So this would be the person, and who every other person in government will go, oh, immigration, that is Joe Bloggs' department over there. He's the junior minister responsible.
Exactly. Now they'll have somebody to blame.
Yeah. So I don't know. I hope Timmy Dooley gets that job, actually. I think he'd be very good at it. Or, various other people I could think of be great candidates for that position. Kate O'Connell would have been excellent if she was re-elected. Would have given her that job either. Anyway. The point being is no, I'm kidding. And by the way, I don't dislike Timmy Dooley at all, but I'm just saying it's just a job that you really, if you're a Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael or independent backbencher, and somebody comes and offers you it this week, my advice is say, actually, I was thinking of spending more time on the backbenches. Do you disagree, Sarah?
No, not at all. I wouldn't take that. But sure, look,
no.
People in politics and a lot of these TDs that may or may not be being offered these kind of roles will have spent a long time on the backbenches and are probably yearning for something a bit more.
That is the other thing. And politicians do like being on telly. And if you get appointed to be the junior minister for education, I promise you're going to spend a lot of time on the telly over the next 5 years.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe you'd be really good on telly. That's the other thing. Like, if you're one of those people, if you're politicians, you're probably full of confidence. You think, I'm going to be really good on telly. And then if you're really good on telly, you might get another job. So who knows? But
I think if you manage to, if you're a junior minister for immigration and you manage to get through the 5 years without crying on the telly, you're probably doing well.
All right. Speaking of telly, and we were exactly at the half hour mark of our allotted time. Let's switch continents and talk about. I'm guessing. I'm surprised you're not wearing your red MAGA hat again. Like, it must have been a great whole week for you.
I was so happy to hear Donald Trump say, because as you know, and as the listeners or viewers of this podcast know, it has been an issue of mine for a long time, to say that henceforth America will recognize 2 genders. That was important to me. I thought that was great. That made me really happy.
Look, I think with Trump, you've got to take the good with the bad. If you're somebody like me, obviously, who suffers from what some people call Trump derangement syndrome. But look, let me just try and be rational here. Let's take the good. I think what you talked about was good. I think the fact that he went to Davos and stood in front of the leaders of some banks and said, look, you've got to stop debanking people just because you disagree with them politically. Oh, that was really, really quite good. I think the fact that he clearly exerted some influence behind the scenes with the Israelis to get them to come to the table on a ceasefire in Gaza.
Like I said he would.
Like you said he would. I think that was clearly and objectively good. I think some of his cabinet appointments have been very good. I think, on the other hand, if you, 2 days before you enter office, launch a meme coin called Trump coin and hold 80% of it in your holding company and then encourage all the people to buy it as a celebratory thing of you taking office and increase your personal wealth by several $1 billion, and then do the exact same thing with your wife, while a lot of people think they're buying that coin to support Republican candidates, but actually the money is going into your personal bank account. I think that if a Democrat did that or a liberal politician did that, I think everybody would not be considered to have that politician's name derangement syndrome if they said it was shabby and a little bit corrupt. And since the definition of corruption is profiting from public office and you're linking it directly to your inauguration and you're profiting, I think that was in the very bad category, to be honest. And I thought standing up and doing this kind of weird thing at a press conference where he said, I want to do a deal over TikTok where I won't enforce the law that Congress passed, which mandates that it be banned. In return, the US government, we might do a deal where I get, the US government gets 50% of the company and somebody else takes control of the other 50%. And if you do that, we might give you a license back. A proposal based on absolutely no legislation at all and just talking shit at a podium. I thought that was very bad as well. And I think this whole business of, we're going to extort Greenland and Panama and throw our weight around, but kowtow down to China because they're bigger than us and Greenland and Panama are small. I thought that was a bit shabby. So I think you take the good with the bad is my approach on Trump. And there's a lot of good, but there's just a lot of nonsense.
But that's fine. I mean, there's things that Donald Trump says that I don't agree with or whatever. But at the end of the day, I think that some of the stuff that he said was good. It remains to be seen, what he does and doesn't do over the next few years. But I don't think that deal, I really don't feel in my gut that that kind of deal would have been done with Israel and Gaza if he had lost the election.
I was talking this week.
I think he'll do good stuff with Ukraine as well. I've said that from the start. And, it's all very well to talk about kind of corruption and this and that, whatever. But I was reminded in the last week about all this. We were told, Michelle Obama used to say, like, when they go low, we go high and all this kind of crap. And Joe Biden's pardons of his entire family and all of that happened in the last day was just unbelievably cynical. And if it was Donald Trump, there would have been public outrage. So I don't think anybody in the American political system at this point, Democrat or Republican, has any longer has any kind of moral or superiority over the other. And I think, Donald Trump is the democratically elected Electoral College and popular vote president of the United States. This is what the Americans wanted. And I think he'll do things, I think, like everyone else, he'll get things right, he'll get things wrong. And let's see.
Can I just say, you remind me of something that actually made me, people, if you're watching me and I was distracting you, because I wanted to pull something up on my screen. This evening being Thursday the 23rd, when we're recording this, the Irish Times published an editorial at 8:05. And it is the Irish Times view on Trump's pardons. He issued pardons this week of a lot of people who were sent to prison for the events of January the 6th, 2021.
Yeah.
The Irish Times view on Trump's pardons, undermining the rule of law. In pardoning the January 6th mob he incited, the US president has extended that extraordinary immunity and impunity to his political supporters. Imagine doing that, Sarah. Imagine using the pardon power to extend extraordinary immunity and impunity to your political supporters. So I checked to see what the Irish Times view was on Joe Biden pardoning his family and his friends and his son and all those people he issues pardon to. Yeah. And you'll be disappointed to know, the Irish Times appears to have missed that story entirely. They just didn't get. They didn't come to a view on it. I mean, the absolute stinking hypocrisy of the Irish Times.
Nauseating.
Which brings me to, I was during the week. It was shortly after the inauguration, and I was genuinely, because I am genuinely like a bit appalled by that whole Trump coin thing, because I do think he's profiting from the office of the presidency. And I put this point to, and if you're listening, you know exactly who you are. Somebody who has become a very dear friend, even though we very rarely meet in person and many talk via text. And this guy is sort of like, he's an evangelical Christian, and he's somebody I would consider one of the most moral people I know. And I said to him, like, I know you're broadly pro-Trump. Like, how can you stand over this kind of nonsense? And he basically said, look, I'm paraphrasing. He said, basically, I can't. But my view is not that Trump is righteous or Trump is good, but that Trump is necessary. And that word, I think, was interesting. It was that he is his existence is simply necessary to do a lot of the stuff that needs doing, even if it comes with these sort of moral, what's the right word? Compromises.
But I also think that that's a really closely in line with sort of what I think. But I also think that he does something, I think over time, like COVID did this as well, that we've become kind of brainwashed into thinking that, COVID proved, we were always brainwashed into thinking that things always took longer than they needed to, and the government couldn't do it. This was complicated and that was complicated. But what COVID showed us is that what the government wanted to do something really fast and really immediate, they can, if they really wanted to. That when there's a will, there can be speed, there can be efficiency. And Trump is necessary as well, because he shows, like, just the way he goes in there and starts signing these executive orders, doing things he said he was going to do. And we will have been told, oh, this isn't possible. Now, that doesn't mean I think that he's going to get every single one of those right, John, but he's reminding people that, it's not all, it doesn't always have to be pure bureaucracy, that change can actually happen fast, that decisions can be made that have consequence by people in office, for the people, in a fast way that actually makes a bottom line impact to their life the next day. No, that would be complicated and we'd have to speak in, 5 years later. Sometimes things can just happen fast. We saw it here in Ireland with COVID, and I think he's necessary. He does something with politics. And even more than that as well, I think he stops, we were hurtling towards an ideology and transgenderism in kids' school and whatever, and that the left, the woke, well, whatever you want to call it, was winning, and it stopped that. And now we're starting to come back to the middle a little bit. America will now, from now on, like, only recognize two genders. To a lot of people who hear me talking about that might seem like a small thing, but it's really, really, really not a small thing, because it has far-reaching implications for loads of things. And it makes it safer for people to talk honestly about those kind of subjects. I noticed with the California fires, late night comedians, late night TV show talk hosts were starting to push back against the California head of fire and trans people in jobs that, and talking about, like, being more honest and saying, we don't care about whether the person who carries us out of the fire is whatever. looks like us or doesn't look like us. We just want to be carried out about the fire. So it's making, when Donald Trump says something like that, it's a flag on the moon. It sets a tone. It makes it safer for people like me or girls, parents of girls who want to professionally swim, or women who are in prisons, to say, actually, I'm not having this. And it's important. And so, some of the things he's going to do are going to be important, and they stop the bleed of nonsense that people like me and you and other people who are concerned about kids and different things and ideology that's being taught, who've been, well, we're obviously not, but people who've been afraid to speak up, makes it safer for them. And I think that's a good thing. And that's why I like Trump, because it doesn't mean I agree with everything about it. It just means that he stops a tide in a certain direction, even just temporarily.
Yeah. First of all, I can just hear the listeners stampeding from my side of the screen to yours and agreeing with everything you say. And for the avoidance of doubt, let's make this clear. I agree with everything Sarah has just said. Where I just have this kind of feeling in the pit of my stomach in relation to all of this is this. I look at all of what you've talked about as sort of a symptom of late stage civilizational decline. That our fundamental problems as a civilization are very big, and rather than dealing with them, we're focusing on the left are as much to blame as the right. In fact, far more to blame on the exact kind of nonsense that you're discussing. And yet, the United States government, if Donald Trump does absolutely nothing this year, will run a budget deficit of $2 trillion. That is $2,000 billion. A billion, of course, being $1,000 million. That is the size. That is just 1 year alone. That is what they will borrow because they can't raise it in taxes in 1 year alone. It is very clear to me that the right were thrilled this week by the sight of him sitting down with these mountains and mountains and mountains of executive orders and just signing them, taking out his pen and signing executive orders. And it strikes me that two things. Number one, those executive orders are not legislation. They don't have the power of legislation. The next president, be it Democrat, Republican, whoever, can undo them just with a stroke of pen. What you can do with a stroke of pen, you can undo with a stroke of a pen. So they're not legislation, and they are not long-term structural fixes to address any of these major problems. That's the first point. The second point is that nobody on the right is willing to have the conversation about the real fundamental problem which faces the United States as a waning superpower, which is that it is living many, 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 many millions of dollars beyond its means every second of every day. And I see Trump as a kind of an avoidance mechanism for dealing with that problem, because he tells us two things. He tells us what all late-stage civilizations want to hear. Late-stage civilizations want to hear that they can be made great again and that they can be restored to the status that they were once in. And how do they always do that? They do it by pretending that their problems are actually caused by something other than what's causing their problems, and that other people can pay to fix their problems. And with Trump, you've seen this from day one. Mexico will pay for the wall. The Chinese are robbing us on trade. We're going to get all that money back in trade. The Canadians are going to give us their land as 51st state. We're going to take Greenland. We're going to take Panama. We're going to be great again. Actually, the problem is you as a country can't pay for the lifestyle you've become accustomed to, and you either need to massively increase taxes or massively cut spending, both of which are hugely unpopular. So I see Trump basically as a civilizational avoidance mechanism where we're avoiding the tough conversations, so instead we can focus on things like getting trannies out of the military. Tell me why I'm wrong. Because
what you're suggesting is that's a move away. Are you honestly suggesting that Sleepy Joe or Laughing Kamala was going to do anything different about that?
No, not.
It was just a different way of avoidance. If you're talking, if the problems is avoidance of the true problems, Trump is telling you that this is how your life's going to be better and avoiding the problem over here. And the other guys were just doing something different. Oh, you're not really a man. You can get breast implants and then we'll call you Mary and everything will be fine. It's just the same thing dressed up in a different outfit.
I know it is. It's just but that's it. But that's it. You nailed it. It's just the same thing dressed up in a different outfit. But the end of the road is the same.
But I don't agree
Whichever
with you.
route you take it.
But I don't agree with you, because I think that Donald Trump is more honest with people about problems, is more honest with people about a route out of this, and is less inclined to spend more time on nonsense than they are.
Yeah, look, I think, and I'm going to reiterate because for the people shouting at me, and I know you're there, I know you're shouting at me, I know you're saying, you hate
We
Trump.
read the comments. We read the
Ben
comments.
Scallon should be the editor of Gript, and he's just really, no, I'm always going to tell you what I think. And what I think is Donald Trump does an awful lot of good stuff, but fundamentally the West's problems, and when I talk about the West, I've always identified, Sarah, because people say, John McGirt, you're not a nationalist. Correct, I'm not. I've always identified more broadly with sort of what I consider the Western civilizational idea. The rule of law, free speech, property rights, democracy, all of those things, which I think are things that we share. Obviously, nationally, Ireland's got its own culture. You can be nationalistic about that. But we share a lot of values, actually, with the New Zealands and the Frances and the Britons and the Canadas and the Americans. We share, it's those Western values that I've always identified with more than maybe nationalism per se. And I just think the entire West is facing this crisis. If you look at Britain at the moment, Britain cannot pay for the way it's living. Its debt is running miles and miles out of control. And eventually that is going to, and when I say eventually, I mean in the next 15, 20 years, going to cause massive problems. Europe's economic growth is in the toilet. The Americans, their economic growth isn't in the toilet, but their budget deficit is running out of control. These are problems like the pension system that your kids are going to have to deal with. I often think it's very good of you, Sarah, to raise 3 people who will pay for my nursing home. It's very good of you to do that for me. But that's a problem for them to deal with.
I had you in mind, actually.
I know, I appreciate it. But the problems to do with the actual national debt issue, particularly in the US and the UK and France and countries like that,
yeah,
these are problems. These are 15, 20-year horizon problems that nobody is taking seriously enough. And they're going to result in catastrophe. And of course, Donald Trump will be retired by then. And we'll be blaming somebody else for the fact that our lifestyles have to change dramatically. Anyway.
I mean, I think that Donald Trump has just taken office after 4 years out of office. And, to your point about the lowly immigration, minister, potential lowly immigration junior minister, you're kind of, the criticism you're going to get in the comments, because they think that you have Trump derangement syndrome, is that you're applying a higher expectation of standard from him than you would have from her.
I mean, no, that's true. I wrote a piece on this week, and what I said, I'm not expecting any US president to wave a magic wand and fix the problem overnight.
Yeah.
But I did set out, and I think it was very fair. If you go back and you read the piece I wrote at the start of the week, where I said, look, here are the United States' problems, and how can we judge Donald Trump on them at the end of his 4-year term? Well, number one, the annual deficit, he's not going to wipe out a $2 trillion deficit in 4 years. No. That's not possible. But can he halve it? Can he get it down to $1 trillion in deficit every year? On manufacturing jobs, he says he wants to bring them back, and he's going to do it with tariffs. Well, how do we measure that success? Because his manufacturing jobs, they actually did increase a bit under Biden as well. But what is the rate of increase? What is the success rate on that? And then obviously, the foreign policy stuff. One thing I thought was very encouraging, and I'll probably get in trouble for saying this was encouraging, I get in trouble anyhow with Trump, is I don't know if you saw his statement on Russia and Ukraine, where his opening gambit on that was to get tough with the Russians, not with the Ukrainians, in terms of bringing them to the table. So we'll see. I mean, if he can deliver that and he can deliver Gaza, then I will doff my cap to him and say, he kept his promises of peace. And that'll be a huge achievement, to the man's credit.
Yeah.
But we shall see. Because I was reading a piece there this evening where the Russians don't seem particularly eager to do a deal with him at the moment, because they think they can get a better one. So what's his reaction to that? We shall see.
We shall.
All right. Was there anything else? Did you want to sing any more praises of beloved Donald while we're here?
No. The only other thing was I had what date is today? It's 23. So this day next week will be the day before, is it, the Shannon election?
I think they are being... I was speaking to one of the candidates today, and if I am correct, I think the Trinity votes are being counted on next Wednesday. So I don't have a calendar in front of me, so I'm not sure what date that is, but Wednesday of the week that this podcast goes out, or the week after this podcast goes out.
Yeah, so I just on that, I had a tweet this week that got a lot of traction. So I'll just bring it up again. If you're listening and you happen to be a Trinity voter who hasn't used your vote yet.
Oh, come on.
I'll just read out my tweet, because Catherine Zappone was on News Talk refusing to apologise for the fact that she had a party during COVID lockdown and for her friends during a hard period of her life, and was plugging her her memoir, which is coming out next year. So I just tweeted one of the most difficult periods of her life. So she had a party while women were not allowed to have partners with them while they miscarried in Holles Street around the corner. Then she refused to answer questions about it later in front of a committee. Now she wants your vote again. The neck of her. So anyway, people can...
That's fairly mild by your standards.
People can interpret that text or that tweet whatever way they like. But just if you have a Trinity College ballot knocking around your house, just so you know, I wouldn't want anybody to forget that particular behaviour. And to come back to Ireland from the United States to run for the Senate when you refuse to come back to answer questions in front of a committee about you potentially breaking COVID regulations to have a party at the time, and now you want people to vote for you again, is absolutely outrageous, disgraceful. And, I would ask people and encourage people to think about that while they place their vote for this particular channel.
I would encourage people to think about content. You know what it's like when you got to write 10 pieces a week, which I do, and constantly find news on slow news days, and we have to find stuff to talk about on this podcast every week. I'm just saying, Catherine Zappone in the Senate is
John, don't you dare say that aloud. There has to be some kind of standard. There has to be some kind of rule, and absolutely under no circumstances should you be encouraging anybody to vote for that fucking niffnuff.
I am unlike my colleague. I am an officially impartial journalist. I obviously share my opinions, but I have never on this panel, on this podcast, or in anything I've written, ever told anyone to vote one way or the other. And I'm not
telling anybody who to vote for. I'm telling people who to not vote for. That's completely different.
Well, I'll let you do that. I am. You don't have the same standards as me, and you're not press council regulated as I am. Not that would actually technically stop me. I just think it's good practice that I don't tell people who to vote for or not vote for. But I have obviously given Sarah a platform to air her opinions, which you have heard and which featured the words fucking niffnuff, which will live long in the memory. We'll leave it there, I think, for another week. Apologies for the outbreak of bad language near the end, if that kind of thing offends you. I think it probably doesn't. If it does, though, we are sorry, and we will try to keep that under control. It's not warranted. Sarah, I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and I hope you enjoy watching the counting of votes in the Shannon when that comes. And
provided we haven't all blown away.
Yeah, provided we all haven't blown away. And in that measure, I wish you a very happy, enjoyable, safe weekend, and we will be back this time next week. That was the week that really was. Take care.